Hi folks, welcome to episode 12. First things first, I hope you all had a great Christmas and a happy new year. I'm sorry for this episode taking so long to produce. I've had lots going on, and a week before Christmas I was in a car accident that totaled my car, so I've had that to sort out too. Anyway, onwards and upwards, as they say. It's time to get the roll cage built and installed in the Metro. Before I did this, I got all the windows out and the remaining bits of trim out of the car so it doesn't get ruined. To get the windows out, as you can see, I just cut the rubbers. They're no good anyway and need to be replaced, so cutting them wasn't the cheapest option, but it was the easiest. The worst part of this job was getting the roof lining out and the sunroof. The screws are rusty. I ended up chiseling a couple of them out, which doesn't really bother me because I won't be putting them back in anyway. The tube bender I was trying to build, it was costing me a lot in time. The die was smooth, but it wasn't smooth enough, and it kept kinking the pipe when I got past about 60 degrees. So what I ended up doing was ordering a die kit from a company up in Northampton. It was about 400 quid, but that expense was going to save me so much time, and it meant I could get the roll cage done before Christmas. So I fitted that into my frame, and it works really well. The bends are smooth. The angle gauge I've got on there is working nice as well, so it's all good news, and it meant that I could get this episode done. There's probably going to be things I've missed in this video, but feel free to drop a question in the comments and I'll add it to my to-do list for the next video. Or I might even do a QA video in the future where I'll answer any questions. Let me know if that's something you'd like me to do. Pop some questions in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them as quickly as I can. So all the windows are out, roof lining's coming out now, and I can get on with getting the cage done. First thing we got to do is measure up. We're going to need some things to do this. One is a roll of masking tape so that you're not marking directly onto the body. You can put a piece of tape on there, write anything you need to do on there. If you're working on your own car and you're going to be painting the inside, it's probably not the end of the world. But if you're doing this on a customer's car or something, you don't want to be marking the body and leaving those marks on there. The other thing we're going to need is an angle gauge. You can put this on the side, up, down, left, right, and it'll tell you the angle you need to bend the tube at. Also need a measuring tape. Any cheap measuring tape will do, it doesn't have to be great. The other thing we're going to need to write all the measurements down is a pen and pad. So the first thing to do is find the center of the body. Easiest way to do that, pick two symmetrical points on the body, take the measurement, and that is 1020 millimeters. So what we'll do, get a bit of tape, pop that on there. So we'll come across from that same point that we measured from, right there. So I'm going to mark the line there on the tape, right where the center of the roof is, and then I'll double check that to make sure. 10, and on the other side, 510. So we've now got the center of the car, and the best way to make a main hoop is go from the center out to the first two bends and then come down. Here's the one I made earlier. This is a cheetah bar. This has slots cut into it so that the tape measure will sit in those slots, and that denotes the start of our bend when we put it in the tube bender. Whenever I make a measurement, I'm making it from that point, and I know how far I've got to go from the center of the car then to get to the start of our bend. So I just need to stick this up in here, get it somewhere near where it's going to be sitting, and then go from that slot to the center of the car, and that is 375 millimeters. I'll just do a little sketch of the two bends I need to put in each side. So from the center to the start of the first bend is 375 millimeters. It's going to be the same on the other side because we've measured the center of the car. All I need to do now is work out what this measurement is each side. So take my angle gauge, put it on the pillar, and then I can just look at that. That's 70 degrees. So on my sketch, I'll put 70 degrees on the corner of that, so I know that that bend is 70 degrees. And because we're coming from here straight down, we know that the difference between 70 and 90 is 20 degrees, because this is going to be a 90-degree bend to get it straight down here. So the next bend we know is going to be 20 degrees. All we need to do is figure out from this point where this next bend is going to start. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to make the bar, tuck it right up in here, and then mark roughly where I want the bend to start to get it to come down straight. So what I'm going to do, to allow myself a little bit of clearance here, so that it's not right up against the body, I'm going to create about 5 millimeters each side, so it's still quite tight, but it's not going to be actually touching the body. So let's go and do that. So now I'm going to mark roughly where the start of the bend's got to be for the 20 degrees. I'm using this straight edge so as I can see where it transitions. I can get it marked and I can transfer it over to the other side and get it bent. Okay, so we've got this bent up, got those angles done, and we have a reasonably well fitting main hoop. So what we need to do now is I'm going to just put some small magnets here just to hold this in place. That's that one, and that's that one. And what I'm looking for is that it's running straight across this roof bar that runs across the top of the body. Okay, so easiest way to do this, again, measure from the center of the tube. So we need to know how long the tube needs to be to go from this side of the hoop, on the magnet side of the hoop here, so that I've got enough to cut off, cope the tube so as it fits nicely. I'll come this side of the tube, I'll measure all the way back down and to the floor, and then I'll probably add something like 100 millimeters, around 4 inches. So I want to put a piece of tape here, make sure that's clean. going to say that that is the centre of our tube right there. So that's the centre of the tube. What I need now is the cheater bar again, and I'm going to put this in so that I can roughly see how far away from this line the start of my bend is going to be. So what I need to do is get this in place down the bottom and up the top in this corner to see how far away from the centre of this tube I want this bend to start. So from there to the bottom bend is 300 millimeters. What we need to do now is get the angle of this bend. So easy way to do that, put this on here, 50 degrees. This is going to be the 50 degrees, and this one down here is going to be the 40 degrees, because the difference between 50 and 90 is 40. So now we need to do the same thing at the top. We are 175 millimeters from the center of the tube. And because we checked earlier, we know it's 50 degrees. The only thing we've got to remember, because the roof is narrower than the floor, I've got to do an offset bend, because if I come straight back with this pipe, put a straight bend here and then a straight bend there, this rear stay is going to end up sitting in here somewhere. And the best way to do this is by getting a straight line of sight down the side of the car. So what we want to do is get this on the edge and just turn it until it's roughly in line, so that we know what the offset is we've got to use. And that is 80 degrees, so we need a 10 degree offset. So that's the 50 degree bend done. I can now pull the tube out, put it back in the other way, get it on the mark and turn it so that I'm creating that offset. I'll use the degree gauge to make sure the die is level and to make sure I've got the right degree on the end of the tube. So when I bend it, it'll create that offset, and then when I do the next one for the other side, I'll point the tube downwards so that it bends the opposite direction. With the tube bent up, I can now use this line and mark about a third of the tube diameter in from the end. I can then cut at an angle from each side. That'll cope the tube so as it meets up nicely with the main hoop, and I can then weld it in place without any big massive gaps. Takes a bit of trial and error getting used to how to do this, but once you've got it, it's pretty easy, and it's a lot quicker than using a tube notcher. So with the tube prepared, I can put it in place, tack it in place, and then I can get the other side tacked in. So as you can see, I've already measured out the fronts, same as the back, centre line first, measure to the first bend, measure to the other bend. There's an offset on here as well, So the front is 50 degrees with a 10-degree offset. This top one, because this roof tips down slightly, I'm only going to go to 35 degrees. So the total angle of the tube ends is going to be 85. That'll just allow me to set this quite tight into this corner and keep it fairly close to the roof line, match up with this tube here. So the other thing I've done, I've cut this brace out so the tube will come down and hit the floor. I've also cut this area out here so that I can get the tube sunk a bit further into the dash, just so that I can keep the main bulk of the tube this side of this pillar. So if I grab a piece of tube, I'll grab my cheetah bar. So if I had it here, I'm going to be losing sort of 30mm of door aperture. Whereas if I sink it right up in there, I can get a bit closer to the windscreen, and I can still get a decent gap on the door. It's just about 5mm this side of the door aperture. So now I've got the measurements, I'll go and get this bent up, and we'll get this in place and get the coping done. So I've got this bent up, so I need to get it roughly in place. And that's about where it's going to be sitting. I need to drop that front end a little bit. I can push this forward then. So I'll cut a little bit off the end of that, maybe 20mm, drop that down and push it forward a bit more. I can then set the length of this tube, and I can do the coping and get it in position. So what I'm going to do now is put a crossbar across the top and follow the windscreen line reasonably closely, but I'm going to tuck it up as much as I can to this panel. So in the event of a skill issue and the car ends up on its roof, this won't come in too far before it starts transferring the energy into the cage. So I'm just going to measure inside from tube to tube, and that's about 940mm. So I'm going to add about 50mm each side. So that gives me enough to tuck up into this. What I'm going to do is put two small bends somewhere around this area, so that I'm pushing the tube straight out to the roof line and then following it along. So I'll go and cut and mark the tube, and I'll get it bent. Now that that's all tacked in, it's time to make up the side impact bars. And when it comes to side impact bars, most of the ones you'll see are straight in line with the roll cage. The only problem with this is it removes width from the interior of the car and makes it awkward to get in and out quickly and easily. I decided to do it a different way to maximise legroom and make it easier to get in and out. The first time I saw this done was FDF Race Shop doing it in one of their builds, so I thought I'd do it that way. Basically, I'm creating two opposing bends at each end of the sidebar to push the tube out into the door, and then I'll stack another one above it with a slightly wider angle, so it gives you more of a scoop into the car rather than just having a fixed straight bar. It gives more room inside and looks funky. With that one made up, I can tack it in place, and I'm putting it about 100mm up from the bottom of the tubes, so when I'm sat in the car it should be in line with my hip. The angle's not perfectly zero, but I think 0.3 of a degree isn't much to worry about. And then I've put the second one on top, and that's slightly wider. I've put a crossbeam in and then doubled up on it the other way. This just puts more strength into the roof. and then I've dropped the cage down and fully welded it, and I can now do all the repairs on the floor, but I'll be doing that in the next episode. I'll see you then.